it really is just one of the most successful mammals on the planet, because it's on every single continent except Antarctica, and there's over 1,200 species of bats all around the world, so they're pretty amazing creatures. So there's two types of bats, although genetics is now probably saying this is not quite correct anymore, but it's easy to put it in mega bats, which use vision, like the fruit bats that you might see over in Australia or the islands. And then there's the micro bats, which are very, very small and use echolocation to find their food. And you may ask, what is echolocation? Well, echolocation is a really, really high frequency, way above our own hearing range. And they use it for foraging and orientation, so trying to find different food. So they'll produce a sound wave that will go out and will hit an object and come back, and they catch them in these big ears. And here I've got some examples of some overseas bats with some really big ears, and you can see them, and they use these big ears to try and catch all the sound that they can, so they can build a picture inside their head of their world environment around them. So bats aren't as blind as bats, as everyone says, but they actually just build this picture of the world around them, and they can pinpoint a tiny little mosquito in the middle of the night just by using these echolocation calls, which is really, really amazing. So echolocation calls, we use bat detectors to convert the echolocation calls that we can't hear down to something we can hear. And I've got some examples here of different echolocation calls. Now I might just get DJ Nick to play some sounds for us. So that's the search phase. All those clicks are little echolocation calls trying to find their way through the forest. And then next we've got a search phase, which is of the feeding buzz, which is trying to pinpoint a tiny mosquito. So all those clicks get really close together to form a feeding buzz. Most kids love that sound.
That's great.
And the third one is a social call, which they make when they're talking to each other inside their roost. So that's the sort of sounds that we can hear using bat detectors, and I'll talk a little bit more about bat detectors a little bit later. So in New Zealand, we have two species of bats. They're called peka peka in Māori. They're the only native land mammals. So when New Zealand drifted off ancient Gondwana land, these bats were the only species there. So we've got the lesser short-tail bat and the long-tail bat. They're not very catchy names, I know. We also had the greater short-tail bat that went extinct in the 1950s due to a huge rat plague that we had. So you can see from this map, maybe if you've got good eyes, the dark blue is the long-tail bats, and the red is the lesser short-tail bats. And this map is constantly changing because we're finding new locations. So really, we don't know where all the bats are. So this is what we're really trying to do, is trying to find out where bats are across New Zealand, and they may be hiding in some really unusual places, like I'll talk about soon. So this is the short-tail bat. Now, this short-tail bat is really interesting because it belongs to its own genus. So it came with New Zealand when it drifted off Gondwana land, and it's really, really unusual because it is able to fold up its wings and then walk along the ground. Now, before humans arrived, that was perfectly fine because there was no predators other than a few birds of prey like ruru. But now they're in pretty much big trouble because their habitat is like trying to, when they go out to feed, they'll scurry along the forest floor like a bit like a mouse, and they'll eat a lot of the berries and fruit and insects on the forest floor. They can fly, but they just spend a lot of time on the ground. So unfortunately, because of our introduced mammals, these bats are really highly endangered and usually only found in places where there's been intense pest control, like mainland islands and offshore islands as well, where predators have been eradicated. As you can see, they're pretty cute little guys. We went and caught these actually just before lockdown happened. This photo was taken in the outside of Te Anau in the Echolocation Valley. So it's pretty special to be able to work with these little tiny little bats. Now, the cool thing about the short-tailed bats is they're actually ecosystem service providers. Now, that's a bit of a complicated term, but basically they provide a service to the forest. So these photos were taken, we're using infrared cameras on Little Barrier Island, where bats are so numerous that the trees just sway with the number of bats in them. And they pollinate all our native flowers. So they're actually really efficient pollinators because they stick their whole head inside the flower and get covered in pollen because they're all furry, and then they go off to the next flower. So Pahutakawa, Riroriwa, Nikau are all really important flowers that these bats use for pollination. So unfortunately, because these bats are missing from the mainland in a lot of places, we're missing these key ecosystem service providers. So we're not actually getting the full pollination service that we normally get from our forests. So our aim is to try and make sure that we can try one day, maybe, bring these short-tailed bats back to places so that we can have these forests providing in full function so that we can see them. And, you know, these bats can actually make the forest flourish even more. And then we have the long-tailed bat, which is slightly smaller, weighs about a couple of $2 coins. It's about the wingspan of my hand, about the size of my thumb when it's all folded up. Pretty small. You can see the tiny little ear ridges in this photo here where they catch those echolocation sounds. And this little bat here has been caught and it's got a bit of bat bling on it. The bat bling is to try and make sure that when we catch the bat again, we know that it's been caught again and what its number was. And it's also, you can see the aerial poking out the back. That's where we attach an aerial transmitter, radio transmitter there, and we're able to track those bats. Unfortunately, because these bats are so small, and you have to have a very, very small transmitter on them, and that small transmitter has a very small battery. So the battery life isn't really that great. So we only usually get it probably around 10 days worth of data if you're lucky. And so it's very expensive to do this radio tracking, and then it only provides you a small window of opportunity. So it's really precious when we do get to be able to catch these bats and do some radio tracking, which I'll talk about what we've been doing in Auckland soon. So the threats to bats, like I said, is the pest mammals, your shiprats, your feral cats, your possums, your mustelids, the normal culprits, but also roost disturbance and competition. They usually roost in trees which have really loose bark or cavities or holes in them, and other pest mammals and other species can often be in those trees as well. Forest fragmentation is where the forest patches are too far apart and we don't know whether the bats can fly between them. So we really want to make sure that we have continuous or stepping stone corridors for these bats. And the big one is the loss of habitat. Because they use these tree roosts, and usually big old trees have big old holes, there's not many big old trees around sometimes. So that loss of habitat is quite critical for them. And new diseases could be a big one as well. So things like over in the States, there's white nose syndrome, which has really affected the bats over there. And climate change could really affect the availability of food, such as the insects that bats eat. So it's really a lot of things are stacked up against our bats, and they really need a helping hand from us. Now here's a bit of a shocking photo. This photo was down in central North Island, where one cat killed over 70-ish short-tail bats, and that's the damage of one cat. And this cat probably wasn't doing it just for eating; it's just for fun. And so this is the effect of just one feral cat. So it's really, we really need to think about how we can put a bit more emphasis on responsible cat ownership, and making sure that people don't dump their cats in forested areas where there's bats like this. But a big one for us around Auckland and other cities in New Zealand is the development that's happening for an expanding population of humans. So the big old trees that might not seem important down in the back paddock where they can knock down some gum trees that don't seem important, but actually exotic trees we've been finding that are really important for these long-tailed bats, such as the gum trees, the willows, the macrocarpa. They all have that loose bark which the bats can get up under. So it can be really, really important to check for bats before you're felling any trees. So we do that using the bat detectors, which I'll talk about in a minute. But really, we wanted to make sure that people are thinking about bats before they're felling their trees, especially if they know that there's bats somewhere in the area. So, community bat detectors. These, like I said, turn the echolocation calls from something we can't hear into something we can hear. And then we use these bat detectors, which we get from the UK, which are only about £70 there, and we're much easier to use them here because we've only got 2 species of bat. So we can just tune in the right frequency for the short-tail bat, which is around 25, 28-ish, and then the long-tail bat, which is around 40 kilohertz, and we can go out looking for bats just on dusk. Now, these community bat detectors we've found in Auckland have been really, really important because the community gets to play a part in finding bats around the area, because we don't know where all the bats are, and we can't find where all the bats are ourselves. So we kind of need this citizen science bat army out there trying to find these bats. And I sort of hope that one day we'll be able to put all these bat detectors out to the public for them to use, and then we can put them onto a sort of mapping layer which we can use to try and create some bat protection zones, so we know that bats live around this area. So when people are going to fell some trees, they need to make sure that they really look hard for bats before they knock down any of these trees. So already Auckland Council has been looking at this for quite a few years now, and we were able to look at different areas of Auckland, and we've been really surprised about where we've been finding them. Down the south of Hanua, where I'm working, and down south near Patamahoe, there's a community group there has found a whole lot of bats there, which is really cool, just on the border of Auckland and Waikato. And we've found them all the way up to the north of the region as well. So it's really amazing just where we can find them and where they pop up from the smallest of little patches. And we've been able to look at some really cool stuff. So this is a heat map of where bat habitat is, and we're using some computer modeling to look at where bats are more likely to be and less likely to be. So in this map, the red is the most likely and the blue is least likely. But there's a lot of blue on that map, but there's a lot of green in the area as well. So that's a sort of mid-zone. So we're trying to find out where we can find these bats all over the sort of green area as well. So it's really exciting for us to be able to improve this computer modeling too, just sort of as we find out more and as the community helps us find out more, we were able to improve this model so we can actually use this to help inform some decisions about where bats are and how we can help them survive into the future. And we've been doing this with the community. Community Waitakere recently did some bat catching studies in the Waitakere Ranges, and we looked at whether the bats were travelling out of the Waitakere Ranges and whether kauri dieback was affecting them. It was really a pilot program to see whether we could catch bats on the edges of Auckland there. And we did catch some really exciting little longtail bats there, even some pregnant females, which was really, really exciting for us because that means to us that they actually are breeding, because these bats actually live for a really long time. With the same bats down in Fiordland have been caught for the past 25, 30 years. So these bats are living quite a long time. So they're long-lived but slow breeders, only have one bat pup at a time. So we were really excited that we could find out that bats were actually breeding in Auckland. So that was really exciting. We put transmitters on them and tried to radio track them, and sometimes we lost those bats, but sometimes we found them again. So it was a really exciting time for us. And what was exciting and different about this is we brought the community along with us, with and some of our partners with Mana Whenua, and they were able to pull together that experience and then express it in different ways. So recently, last October for Halloween, we had a bat exhibition, and these people, the community people that came along, had expressed their way that they had seen bats and put them into the art, which was another good way of trying to tell the story about bats and trying to get that message across to a different audience, which I think is really, really special for us to be able to reach a different audience, but also tell the story of bats in a different way. So if you want to be a bat spotter, what do you need to do? Well, you can contact your local council or DOC office to borrow a bat detector. Auckland Council has some that we can loan out, and so do a few community groups around Auckland now that we've funded for them to have their own bat detectors. They're really in demand, especially during the summer months. So sometimes there's a bit of a waiting list, but we hope to try and get some more. You can look for bats in your backyard, your local park, your school grounds, those places, but bats really need specific conditions. So sort of the four things that we want from when we're looking for bats is to be near a water source, so a nice flowing stream or lake edge or something like that. Need to be near open areas. Bats don't like too cluttered environments, so they like forest edges are really good across to a golf course. Golf courses seem to be quite popular for bats. I don't know. And big mature trees also. So your native trees like your kauri, your pururi, but also your exotic trees like willows and gums are really important. Those really big old trees. And those on the edges of forests are places where we can find them. And of course, warm nights. So bats don't like to go out when it's too cold. They're pretty small little guys, so they need to be quite warm, and so they're more active during those warmer nights. So you're more likely to find them with a bat detector on those warmer summer nights. So we usually say the bat season is sort of between November to April. So we're getting a little bit colder now, so the bats might not be as active, but they sort of go down into sort of a torpor type hibernation sort of state where they can slow down their metabolic rate and things like that. But they're still around, so on those warmer nights they might go out and feed, but they're just not as active. So I guess the three key steps to being wanting to be a bat spotter is tell your friends about bats. Most people don't even know about them. Make sure you tell them how great bats are. We really want to tell the story about bats, and that we want bats to be an iconic species within New Zealand. Think about bats, especially when you're doing any tree felling and pest control. The pest control in your backyard could really, really help. Doing some simple rat trapping can really help your bat population, as well as just checking for bats before you chop down that tree. And then borrow a bat detector and see if you can spot some bats. You can see in this photo here on the edges of them, the tiny little bats there, very, very small, like a Batman symbol. But you can find them with the naked eye, but using a bat detector is the best way to find them. So I've got some contact details there if you've got any further things you wanted to look into, but I think now we'll open it up for some questions, Nick.
Couple of quick ones. The age of maturity, how long do they go for? How long do they live for?
So we think they live for over 30 years, but we don't know. Like I said, they have been catching them for the same bat has been turning up for the past 25 to 30 years down in Te Anau, near Te Anau there. And so we really don't know, but we think they could live up 30 to 40 years, which is a really long time for a very small mammal compared to something like a mouse, which only lives a couple of years.
And distances that they'll travel that you've found them again?
Like I said, the most of the studies I've done down in Fiordland, where they can travel 60 kilometres, but across an urban landscape or across a farming landscape, we really don't know. We'd really like to know more about how they travel across those different landscapes, but at the moment we don't really know.
Did lockdown change the way rats were, around central Auckland and things like that? You know how birds have been, of course, coming into the centres because of cars, far less cars. Do you think they were flying a bit closer to the centre of town?
I don't know. It would be interesting if anyone had had their bat detectors out and were listening for the bats. But it could be that the bats were coming in closer to town. We know that down in West Auckland, where I'm living, is we know the bats come all the way into the urban areas and feed around some of the floodlights around the car park, so like the Pick and Save car park on Lincoln Road. So it's really interesting that bats can survive quite readily in a urban environment.
Somebody asked, do they live in the bark of good old Pinus radiata?
Absolutely, yeah. And we've been working with our forestry operators so that they're well aware of bats and what to do when they find bats as well.
A few questions now that I'll go through. You've had a lot of questions. It's great. Jay asks, how can we support growth in bat numbers in our property if we have native bush?
Yeah, so I guess the key one is pest control. But also, like I said, checking before you're felling any trees and doing some riparian planting. So we think that bats really like clean streams where they can feed off the insects that come off the water at night. So so doing any riparian planting could really help some bats as well.
Jacqueline asks, do bats ever make sounds you can hear without a bat detector?
Sometimes they can make some social calls that some people can hear, but usually it's far above our own hearing range.
How can bats, this is quite a technical one, from Katie, how can bats manipulate their larynx to produce such a diverse range of calls?
Oh, crikey. Yeah, well, they've evolved this way in such a way over millions and millions of years. So it's really impressive that the different bats have different echolocation calls, and different species have different echolocation calls. So it's pretty amazing. And over in the UK, it's a lot harder to use those bat detectors because there's overlapping frequencies, so you can't always tell which bat is which species-wise. But in New Zealand, we're lucky. We only, in a way, we only have two species. So it's really interesting, but it's not something that I technically know about how the operation of the larynx works.
There's quite a few technical questions coming through. I'm going to put you through another one. Katie asks, since the long-tailed bat's ear is so small, do they rely less on echolocation than other microbats and more so in on other sensors?
Interesting.
Hmm.
So overseas, you would have seen those bigger pictures of the really big ears. Um, those bats, they have a lot more cluttered environment. So in a sort of rainforest type environment where there's a lot more things that they need to move about and dodge and things like that. But our long-tail bats are more edge feeders. So they use the edges of forests to feed off. So maybe they don't have the same big ears for that reason. Again, probably too technical for me.
Yeah, well, a lot of them want the technical answers, so you're doing okay. Um, how do you retrieve the transmitter from the bats once the battery has gone flat?
You don't, unfortunately. That's the problem. Is that yeah, once your batteries run out, you can't find that bat again. So, but luckily we just we glue it to the fur. So it means that once that fur grows off, that transmitter falls off. And yeah, unfortunately, we never see that transmitter again, which kind of makes it a little bit expensive. But yeah, it's the only way we can do it, unfortunately, until technology improves.
I see that somebody asked during the presentation just how fragile were those bats that you had in your hand? You weren't wearing gloves, stuff like that. So can you explain that to us?
So overseas, bats carry a lot of diseases, and luckily in New Zealand we don't have those diseases, so we don't use gloves for protection for humans. But these bats are very small and they're quite fragile, but they're relatively robust, and so we can check their wings, and we can check whether they're pregnant and things like that, and look at the sex of the bat. Um, so yeah, we're able to use bare hands, luckily in New Zealand, to look at these and study these bats.
Hazel asks, have we done any studies to see if New Zealand bats use bat boxes like they do in the UK?
Yes, yes. So the work that I did down in Hamilton, we put bat boxes up along the Waikato River there, and we waited and we waited and nothing happened. And then some other bat researchers a few years later were tracking some bats, and they tracked them back into a roost box. So it took them almost 7 years before they moved in, but I guess it was well weathered then and didn't smell too new. And so yeah, down in Hamilton they're using bat roost boxes, which is really exciting. But we really need to do more study to look at how we can use these bat roost boxes, and we don't want um, people to think that they can chop down a tree and put up a roost box, because that's not a replacement. We really want these roost boxes to be supplementary to the other native and exotic trees there.
You talked at the start when we were offline. You talked about the bat family near Pack and Save in Rotorua. How are they going?
Yeah. Some other bat researchers found some bats right in the middle of Rotorua there near Sulphur Point, which is really, really great that we can keep finding these bats in these some really unusual situations. A few years ago, we found bats down in South Auckland under someone's veranda near Paramahoe there, and that was really crazy that we could. There was one bat sitting up in the rafters there, just using that every single night. So the person there didn't think that that was any big deal, but I thought that was amazing.
It is, it is. Somebody, clever person just asked, do they swim? Do bats swim?
There are some species overseas of fishing bats, which is pretty cool. They sort of use their echolocation like a fish finder, and they can catch fish off near the surface of the water, which is pretty cool.
Somebody's asked a couple of years ago, or it might be more than that, they were trying to get a couple of colonies on Kapiti Island. How did that go? Did it work?
So that was one of the attempts to move shorttail bats, which are the more endangered species or the more rare species there, and they used that was something that I did when I was part of my undergraduate degree. Was part of they moved bats from Mount Bruce Wildlife Centre and Pukaha, and they moved them to Kapiti Island, but they actually took bat pups away from their mums when they'd weaned, and then moved them to Kapiti Island because they'd had problems with them homing problems before, where they homed back to their place where they'd been. So they thought if they took the pups from their mums when they're really young and moved them over to Kapiti, that homing instinct wouldn't be a problem, which it wasn't. And for the first few months, but unfortunately they got some weird disease which really affected their ears, and some of them had to have their bits of their ears amputated. So that's really critical for the bats, and so they had to evacuate the short-tail bats from Kapiti back to Auckland Zoo, where they were being cared for there. And so that was unfortunately not a very good attempt at translocation. So any translocation now needs to really look at possible diseases and stresses that may affect the bats, because we don't really want that sort of thing to happen again.
Here's one from Dino. There's big old trees with big holes, and we know they're long-tailed bats, but how do we find the roost so we can protect those areas from introduced predators?
So similar to a lot of power poles, you see those metal bands that go around the trees. You can put those around the trees that you think that there might be some big holes in, which bats may use. Again, doing pest control is really, really important, and making sure that you're doing your trapping for your possums and your rats and your mustelids is really important. But bats actually move roosts every couple of days, so they may move to a completely different area and then come back to that maybe much later. So we can't predict where the roosts are and protect this one roost, because they'll move off quite quickly.
Frankie wants to know where you got your great bat t-shirt.
Oh, this is a tumbleweed tee. They do some cool native t-shirts and things like that. So yeah, definitely check them out.
Here's one from Katie. Would forested corridors throughout cities aid bat populations and help accommodate for growing populations?
Yeah, and that's what we kind of want to do with the work that I'm doing down in South Auckland, where we want to try and create forest corridors from across from Waiuku all the way across to the Hanua Ranges, so that we've got some forest patches that aren't too far apart for the bats to fly across. So yeah, having those key stepping stones is really, really important, and we can try and do that in different areas of Auckland.
A lot of people just asking, they're very keen to get hold of their bat detectors, and from all different parts of New Zealand. Can you just go through that again? How can they get one quicker than anywhere else?
So there may be quite a demand now after this talk, but
yeah, I reckon.
Yeah, and within Auckland Council, you can contact us by contacting us at biodiversity@aucklandcouncil.govt.nz, and we've got bat detectors there that are available. But in Hamilton, there's also Project Echo, where they can get bats through the Waikato Regional Council. A lot of other DOC offices and councils now have bat detectors, but if they don't, start pressuring them to get bat detectors, because bats are great and people should start looking for them. And I think that, bat detectors should be part of any cool tool library or trapping library, because it's a really good outcome monitoring of doing any pest control. And if we really want to be a predator-free New Zealand, then looking out for bats to see what the effect of this pest control would be really important as well.
Ness and Jacob have said, boo-hoo, we're too late with an emoji. Was this recorded to share it all? And it is, everybody. It's been recorded, and we'll have this up on the Predator Free New Zealand Trust webpage with a link. We'll probably have it up by tonight or first thing in the morning. How do you catch them? Somebody's asked how do you catch them. I can't remember whether you told us.
No. So there's some really cool traps that we use. They're called harp traps, and they're like a whole series of fishing lines that hang down, and the bats can't quite see them with the echolocation calls. So the bats fly towards them, and you put them in a sort of a corridor where the bats might have to fly down, and you put these harp traps up, and the bats fly into them and hit the sort of fishing line and fall down into a little soft catching bag, and we're able to pick them out of those catching bags. But trying to find that right spot of where the bats might fly down this corridor is really, really tricky. So we've actually been using some new technology using bat lures, and where we produce the echolocation calls that we can't hear, so that the bats come and check it out, go, oh, what's that sound, and then fall into this harp trap. So it's a bit of a tricky science, but we're still working on it, and it's hopeful that we can do some more of this sort of work soon.
Good question here asking from Sophie. You mentioned that ruru are a natural predator for these bats. Do you have any historical data on how much of an impact ruru would have had on the native bat populations in the past?
Yeah, I guess the ruru and some of the other birds of prey that we've now lost, like the laughing owl, may have utilized bats as prey, but I don't think that would have been a huge impact. So I think that we've seen a much bigger impact from the introduced predators. So yeah, if we can try and bring it back to where ruru are the only predators, then I think that we're doing a good job.
Good one here from looks like Helle the physio. Are bats susceptible to the same water toxicity as dogs?
Not something that I'm too familiar with, but bats actually they can they've got a much higher metabolic rate than we do, so they're pretty disease resistant, and so that's really good for a lot of things. But it's the new diseases now that we need to worry about them coming into New Zealand.
Here's a good one from Jason, South Waikato. He's just wondering, do bats get caught in predator traps? You know, rat traps, there's a lot more now. And if so, what measures can be considered to solve that problem?
So I've never heard of a bat getting caught in a rat trap. There's lots of different traps out there in the market, but I guess when you're using a trap, you're using eggs or peanut butter, which I don't think a short-tail bat who might be crawling along the ground would be really attracted to. So I guess it really depends on that bait. And before the question gets asked, no, 1080 doesn't kill bats. And there's been a lot of research about that. And so it's really good that we've got tools out there that we can use, from trapping to aerial 1080, that we can use to try and control some of the predators to save our bats.
Yeah, good answer. Getting so many questions, it's amazing. What about, do bats live in caves and crest areas? Would it be worth taking your monitor into the bat cave?
Yeah, they can roost in caves, but mostly our bats are more tree roosting. So trees are the big things. So those hollow trees with the loose bark are really key for our bats.
Here's one from Jesse. A couple of months ago, there were some images circulating. It's like a UFO or a UFB of potential bat sighting in Wellington,
Yes.
maybe around Crofton Downs. Now, any follow-up to that?
Yes, I saw that, and I've been talking to Calvin online about that, and it's it could be a very big moth or a very small bat, and it's still very hard to find out. But we've tried to get some bat detectors out there, but haven't confirmed anything quite yet.
Are there any places in New Zealand that you're sort of, rubbing your hands together, hoping someone's going to find it because everything is, that you haven't had any sightings yet, but they should be bats there?
Well, I've always thought that Wellington would be the place where we'd find bats because they've got, a great green belt through the middle of the city there, and the predator control there has been really amazing. But they just haven't been found quite yet. I think they've been looking for them around the Rumataka Ranges there and further up the coast and then the Wairarapa. Yeah, Wellington, I think would, it could be that bats could be there somewhere.
Somebody asked before if there's some great resources they can get their hands on from you guys for teaching their school children, particularly primary, get them into bats at an early age. Is there some stuff you can send us to?
Yeah, I can. I'll put some links on my Facebook page for everyone who wants to look at that. And there's some great resources, including a really cool poster that's used for education resources for schools as well.
Mark asks, do bats move above the bushline in the summer to feed?
Yes. So they can be right up above the tree line, and feeding on the insects that come off the trees there. But sometimes they might be right down low across where the down by the streams. So it really depends on the weather conditions and things like that. If it's too windy, then they might be more sheltered down in the streams. But if it's quite a still, clear night, then they can often be seen just above the tree line.
Stacey asks, there's lots of reports of bats seen around street lamps, etc. Do these bright lights help or hinder them?
Yeah, well, there's two schools of thought over there, and it's been studied overseas that some bat species are discouraged by light, and it actually affects them. That it's a barrier to them; they can't get past it. But from what anecdotal evidence that we've heard, New Zealand's longtail bats seem to be attracted to street lamps. Around Pelorus Bridge, there in the top of the south, they're known to be around that area. They've been known to fly around the floodlights at the Waikato Stadium match at during the rugby games. But we haven't really confirmed anything about whether lighting may affect these bats.
Got a lovely one here from Oscar, who's 5 years old, and he wants to know, but quite sternly, why aren't we allowed to have bats as pets?
Oh yeah, I wish I could have a bat as a pet. Yeah, absolutely. But these bats are protected and they need to be kept in the forest where they can feed with on the tiny little mosquitoes and things like that. And I don't think you'd like to have mosquitoes flying around your house. Absolutely. And overseas, they put bat boxes for roost boxes up against their house so that bats can fly around and catch the mosquitoes around their house, which is really useful, I think, as well. So maybe that could be a good idea to have bats near, but not in your house.
That's great. A great answer. Nicely done. Rada has said our community group is keen to manage sycamores. Do you know if bats use sycamores for feeding or shelter?
I haven't heard of bats using sycamore. I don't think that'd be the right type of tree, unfortunately. But yeah, it's still very new, and it could, bats have proven us wrong before.
You've got a lot of kids loving your presentation at the moment. So Isaac has asked, how large is the largest bat in the world?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So there's a giant flying fox that is really large. It's about it's huge. Its wingspan is probably a bit, really big. But then there's the tiniest bat, which ranges down to something called a bumblebee bat, which is only a couple of grams. So the huge range of bats, from the largest bat, which is one of the flying foxes, overseas, and right down to the tiniest little bumblebee bat, which is it's amazing, the diversity and huge range of different types of bats out there.
And we're nearly there. We've got just a couple of questions to go. There used to be, this is from Mike, a third bat species that's not extinct, right?
Well, technically the greater short-tailed bat, like I said, we think went extinct, but it's actually been classed as data deficient by the Department of Conservation, which kind of means we don't have enough data on it. So no one has seen this bat for well over 40, 50 years now. So it's we think that there may be some still there on some of the offshore islands, but our monitoring equipment hasn't been quite been placed in the right places to find them yet. But it could be that the greater short-tailed bat may make a surprise discovery, a bit like our target did, and other species in New Zealand have done. So it would be great if we did have our third species back again, but we just don't know yet.
You've been great. Thanks so much. Just finally, a lot of the people that watch these webinars are in all throughout New Zealand are working really hard at doing predator-free work. Maybe just from you to them, something inspirational so that we all keep motivated to help. I mean, just knowing that we're doing it for the bats is a goodie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that bats should be an iconic species, a bit like a tui or a kiwi. For New Zealand, bats are unique, so we can really make a difference for our bats by doing just a little bit of pest control, by putting your simple rat trap in your backyard. Might not be a big deal, but that might mean that these bats have a safe place to roost at night. So being able to do that pest control is really, really important to help save our long-tail bats into the future.
Thanks so much, Ben. It's been just a delight to have you, and so amazingly informative. So much to learn about bats, and good luck with your journey and
Great, thank
helping
you.
to protect them.
Awesome.